Tip number 1, lights above generators. Let's start with a detail that's easy to overlook but can be a lifesaver, lights above the gens. When you're new to Dead by Daylight, finding generators can be one of the most frustrating tasks, especially when you're under pressure. You might find yourself wandering around aimlessly, trying to locate a gen while precious seconds tick away. But there's a visual cue in the environment that can help guide you. On most outdoor maps, if you look closely, you'll notice lights above the gens. These are an intentional design feature meant to guide players. By keeping your eyes peeled for these, you can significantly cut down on the time it takes to locate a gen. The sooner you find a gen, the sooner you can start working on it, and every second counts in Dead by Daylight. But what about those dreaded indoor maps where visibility is limited? Let's take Leary's for example. Here, there is a different visual cue. Instead of lights above the generators, you want to focus on the lights above doorways. These illuminated doorways will lead you towards the rooms with gens. If the light is flashing, there is a gen in there to be completed. If it is lit up, there is already a completed gen. And if there is no light, then there is no gen in the room. It's subtle, but once you start looking for these lights, you'll find navigating Leary's a bit easier. Similarly, in the game, generators are often hidden behind sliding doors. Unlike other maps, the gens in the game aren't always out in the open, so you'll need to actively look for these doors and find the gen that's on one side. Once the gen is complete, the door will slide open. This adds an extra layer of challenge, but knowing where to look can save you a lot of time and frustration. So next time you're in a trial, don't forget to look up. Whether you're outdoors or indoors, there's usually a visual cue to help you find the generators faster. It's a small detail, but mastering it can make a big difference in your efficiency and your overall performance in the game. Tip number 2, look behind as you run. Next, let's talk about a skill that's absolutely crucial in DBD, looking behind you while you're running. At first, this might sound counterintuitive. After all, when you're running from the killer, your natural instinct is to focus on where you're going, to avoid obstacles, and to get to safety as fast as possible. But here's the thing. Knowing where the killer is in relation to you can make all the difference in whether you escape or whether you get caught. When you're in a chase, the killer is often right on your heels, and it's easy to panic. But if you train yourself to glance behind you while running, you'll gain crucial information. Is the killer gaining on you? Are they about to swing? Are they going to try and mind game you by doubling back or faking a move? All of these questions can be answered by quickly looking behind you. This tactic allows you to make more informed decisions. For example, if you see the killer is close and getting ready to hit, you might want to drop that pallet sooner rather than later. On the other hand, if you see that the killer is still a few steps behind, you can hold off on dropping the pallet and extend the chase. This not only wastes the killer's time, but also saves those valuable resources for later in the match. Looking behind you also helps in situations where you need to decide whether to vault a window or take another path. If the killer is right on top of you, vaulting might be risky, as they could easily land a hit during the animation. But if you put some distance between you and the killer, vaulting might be the perfect move to create even more space. Now, learning to do this effectively does take practice. At first, you might feel disoriented or you might bump into things while trying to look back, but stick with it. The more you practice, the more natural it will become, and eventually you'll be able to do it without even thinking. It's one of those skills that separates beginner survivors from more advanced players. Looking behind you while running is a simple yet incredibly effective tactic that can drastically improve your ability to survive chases. It gives you the information you need to outmaneuver the killer and keep yourself in the game for longer. So, start practicing this today, and you'll soon see a big difference in your chase outcomes. Tip number 3. Killers run faster than survivors do. Here's something you might not realize at first. Killers run faster than survivors do. It's not something that's immediately obvious, but it is a fundamental aspect of the game that affects how you play in chases. In Dead by Daylight, survivors move at a base speed of 100%. This is the standard movement speed when you're running, and it's the baseline for everything you do while moving around the map. Killers, however, are generally faster. Most killers move at either 110% or 115% speed compared to survivors. This means that if you're running in a straight line, the killer will gradually catch up to you. This speed difference is crucial to understand because it means you can't rely on simply outrunning the killer. If you try to run in a straight line to safety, the killer will close the gap and hit you before you reach a pallet or window. Instead, you need to use the environment to your advantage. When you're being chased, your goal should be to break line of sight with the killer as often as possible. This is where map knowledge comes into play. If you know where the pallets, windows, and other obstacles are, you can loop around them to buy yourself more time. By using these obstacles, you force the killer to either go around or break through them, which slows them down and gives you a chance to gain some distance. Another important aspect of this is understanding the concept of mind games. Because killers are faster, they might try to predict your movements and cut you off. This is where you can get creative. For example, you can fake going in one direction and then quickly change course, or pretend to vault a window, but instead you can double back. These tricks can throw the killer off and give you those precious extra seconds to get away. But remember, different killers have different speeds and abilities. Some killers, like Hillbilly or Blight, have special abilities that allow them to close the distance even faster, so you'll need to adjust your strategy accordingly. Understanding the specific killer you're up against and their capabilities can help you tailor your escape plan. Knowing that killers run faster than survivors is a key piece of knowledge that will change how you approach chasers. You can't rely on outrunning them in a straight line. You'll have to use your surroundings, break line of sight, and outsmart the killer with quick decisions and mind games. It's all about playing smart and staying one step ahead. Tip number 4. Generate a penalty for working together. Did you know there's a penalty for working on generators together? When you first start playing DBD, you might assume that more hands on a gen would mean it gets done faster, right? Well, that's only partially true, and there's a bit more to it. When one survivor works on a generator alone, it takes about 90 seconds to fully repair it. This is the baseline time you need to keep in mind. Now, if 2 survivors work on the same generator, you might think it would take half the time, but that's not exactly the case. Instead, with 2 people, the time drops to around 53 seconds. It is still faster, but it's not a direct 50% reduction. When you add a 3rd survivor to the mix, the time does drop further, but only to around 43 seconds. This is because DBD has a built-in penalty when multiple survivors work on the same generator. The progress bar will turn red, indicating that the efficiency is reduced. This penalty is important to understand because it means that piling onto a generator isn't always the best strategy. In fact, in many cases, it's actually more efficient to split up and work on different gens. By doing this, you spread out the pressure on the killer, making it harder for them to patrol and defend multiple generators at once. It also maximizes the amount of progress your team can make in the shortest amount of time. However, there are exceptions to this rule. Sometimes it makes sense to have 2 survivors on a gen, especially if it's high risk or a difficult one to complete. For example, if a generator is in a central location that the killer frequently patrols, having 2 people on it can help you get it done quickly before the killer shows up. But generally speaking, more than 2 survivors on a single generator isn't the most efficient use of your time. There's also the consideration of perks. Some survivor perks, like Prove Thyself, can counteract this penalty by boosting the repair speed when working with others, but unless you have those perks, it's usually better to stick to the 2 survivor rule. Understanding the generator penalty for working together is a crucial part of becoming more efficient in DBD. While it might seem counterintuitive, splitting up and covering more ground is often the better strategy, unless the situation calls for a concentrated effort on a single generator. Keep this in mind during your matches and you'll start seeing better results in your generator completion times. And finally, tip number 5. Great wiggle skill checks make no difference to time. Let's talk about something that might surprise you: wiggling free from the killer's grasp, specifically the wiggle skill checks. You might think that hitting those great skill checks during the wiggle phase will speed up your escape, but here's the truth: it doesn't actually make a difference. When you're caught by the killer and they're carrying you to a hook, you'll notice that you have to hit skill checks to fill up your wiggle meter. It's natural to assume that hitting great skill checks would make the process faster, but in reality, the time it takes to wiggle free remains the same regardless of whether you hit great or good skill checks. The total time it takes to wiggle out of the killer's grasp is fixed at 16 seconds, provided you're consistently hitting skill checks. Hitting the great skill checks will make the killer sway more as they are carrying you, so it does have some benefit, just not to the wiggle duration. This means that while it's good to aim for those great skill checks, you shouldn't stress too much if you only hit good ones. The key is to stay calm and be consistent. Panicking and missing skill checks altogether is what will slow you down and possibly cost you your chance to escape. It's also important to note that some killers do have perks that can affect your wiggle progress. For example, the perk Iron Grasp makes it harder to wiggle free by reducing the strength of the wiggle and increasing the time it takes for you to escape. On the other hand, survivor perks like Boil Over can make it harder for the killer to carry you, giving you a better chance to wiggle free. Understanding how these perks interact with the wiggle mechanic can help you make better decisions about when and how to use them. In some situations, you might even want to consider deliberately not wiggling right away. For example, if you're being carried to a hook that's particularly far away and you know the killer is struggling to get there, you might want to time your wiggle to escape just as they're about to reach the hook. This can catch the killer off guard and give you a better chance to make a break for it. So while hitting great wiggle skill checks does feel satisfying, just remember it doesn't actually change the time it takes to escape. Focus on staying calm, hitting those checks consistently, and understanding the situational aspects of wiggling to give yourself the best chance of breaking free. And there you have it, 5 things I wish I knew as a beginner in Dead by Daylight. These tips might seem simple, but they can make a huge difference in your gameplay, helping you survive longer, make better decisions, and ultimately become a more effective teammate. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe for more Dead by Daylight content, and let me know in the comments below what are the tips you think new players should know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the fog.